The scorching heat of Phoenix seemed like just another ordinary summer day, but what awaited Officer Mike Dawson would change everything. A car stopped in the middle of the street with a 4-year-old boy locked inside, alone, frightened, and sweating. What seemed like a simple accident soon revealed a much darker story. As the minutes passed, Mike realized that something far more sinister was unfolding. What he would uncover that afternoon would bring everyone to the edge of disaster. The relentless sunlight of a Phoenix summer beat down on the streets, its reflection mirroring the rising tension that seemed to hang in the air. Officer Mike Dawson cruised slowly through his patrol route, the hum of his police cruiser barely cutting through the quiet heat. As a seasoned cop, he'd responded to countless calls over the years, but something about this afternoon felt different. His radio crackled to life, pulling him from his thoughts. Dispatch to Officer Dawson. Possible child left in a locked vehicle. Reported on 5th and Cedar. Respond immediately. The urgency in the dispatcher's voice made Mike's pulse quicken. He didn't know why, but something in the pit of his stomach told him that this wouldn't be just another routine call. He flipped on the sirens, the familiar wail filling the air as he sped down the street, adrenaline already beginning to pump through his veins. When he arrived, the sight before him was unsettling. A car sat in the middle of the street, engine off, windows rolled up. There was no one around, just the eerie quiet of a late afternoon. Mike pulled up beside it, eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. He stepped out of the cruiser, scanning the area as he approached the vehicle. It was then that he saw the boy. A small child, no older than 4, was sitting in the back seat, his face pressed against the glass. His tiny body was covered in sweat, his cheeks flushed with distress. The boy's eyes were wide, filled with panic, and Mike could hear his faint sobs from outside the car. It was clear the child had been in there for a while. Mike's first instinct was to act fast. He tried the door, but it was locked. His heart began to race as he quickly surveyed the area for any sign of the parents or whoever was supposed to be with the child. His eyes fell on a house nearby. Someone had to be around. But Mike's gut told him that this wasn't just a simple case of a parent forgetting their child in the car. He radioed for backup, but time was slipping away. He couldn't wait. He pulled out his tools and began working on the lock, trying to get the door open as quickly as possible. The boy's sobs grew louder, more frantic, and it only spurred Mike on. Every second counted. Finally, with a click, the door swung open. Mike didn't hesitate. He reached inside, carefully unbuckling the boy's seatbelt and pulling him into his arms. The child was trembling, barely able to catch his breath. Mike could feel the heat radiating from his small body. Sweat, dehydration, panic. There was no mistaking it. This child had been locked in that car for far too long. The boy's wide eyes looked up at him, and his voice cracked as he spoke. Mommy won't come back." Mike froze, his breath catching in his throat. The words were simple, but they were chilling. This wasn't just an accident. Something was terribly wrong. Mike gently cradled the boy in his arms, trying to comfort him as best as he could. He needed to know more. "Hey, buddy, where's your mommy? Can you tell me her name?" The boy, still shaking, barely responded, his voice weak. She said she'd be back, but she won't come back." Mike's heart sank as the realization hit him. This child wasn't just lost. There was a story behind those words, and it wasn't one that was going to have a happy ending. He could feel the weight of the situation pressing on him as he looked around, hoping for some sign of where the boy's parents might be. He needed to get to the bottom of this. Every second mattered. As backup arrived, Mike handed the boy over to an EMT, his mind already racing. He had to find out who the child was, where his mother was, and why she wasn't there to protect him. It didn't take long for the investigation to take a sharp turn. The car was registered to a woman named Sarah. A quick check of her records revealed a name that Mike recognized. Sarah Thompson, involved in an ongoing custody battle with her ex-husband, Richard. Mike's instincts flared. The puzzle pieces were falling into place, but this was only the beginning. The questions were piling up, and Mike knew the answers wouldn't come easily. He could already feel the tension building inside of him. Something wasn't right, and Mike was determined to get to the bottom of it, no matter what it took. As the investigation began, Mike had no idea just how deep this story went, or how far it would pull him into a web of family betrayal, lies, and a battle for the safety of an innocent child. Every moment now felt critical. Mike stared out the window of the squad car as he drove toward the address he had just been given. The boy's face kept replaying in his mind, those wide eyes, the utter helplessness in his expression. He tried to shake off the unease that had been growing inside him, but the weight of the situation only seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute. The radio buzzed with static, snapping him back to reality. "Dawson, we've got an update on the mother. Her name is Sarah Thompson. The car's registered to her. We're checking her history now. Mike gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, feeling the urgency settle into his chest. It had taken barely a minute to search Sarah's name, and already Mike knew that this was more than just a missing parent or a custody dispute. The more the dispatch team looked into her history, the more concerning the situation became. Sarah Thompson, she's got an active restraining order against her ex-husband, Richard. Violent history, multiple reports of abuse. They're currently in the middle of a custody battle. Richard has a history of threats. Mike's heart sank. The boy's statement, "Mommy won't come back," now had more weight to it. Sarah wasn't just an ordinary mother trying to juggle a difficult situation. She was trying to escape a dangerous man. He arrived at the address listed for Sarah. It was a modest two-story home, but there was nothing about it that gave away the gravity of the situation brewing behind closed doors. Mike parked and walked up to the front door, knocking firmly. A moment later, a woman appeared in the doorway, thin, with dark circles under her eyes, her hair messy as though she hadn't slept in days. She looked at Mike with a mixture of confusion and fear. "I'm Officer Dawson," he said gently. "I'm investigating a situation involving your son. Is Sarah here?" The woman's eyes immediately widened, her hand instinctively reaching for the doorframe as if to steady herself. "My daughter, she's gone. I don't know where she is." Mike's confusion was immediate. "Your daughter? We're looking for Sarah Thompson, your granddaughter's mother." The woman hesitated before stepping back, letting him inside. The moment she did, the overwhelming stench of stale air, empty takeout boxes and cigarettes hit Mike's senses. There was an emptiness about the house, like it had been abandoned for days. "She went to the police a few days ago, but she said Richard was going to hurt her," the woman said. Her voice barely above a whisper. She pulled her hand away from the doorframe and wiped a tear away from her cheek. "I don't know what to do anymore. She's been trying so hard to get away from him. I don't think Richard's done with her. He doesn't care." Mike didn't need to hear more to understand the situation. Richard wasn't just a violent ex. He was a man willing to do anything to get what he wanted, control. And the boy, now safely in the care of paramedics, was the prize. "Has Sarah been in touch with you at all recently?" Mike asked. The woman shook her head, her hands wringing in her lap. "No, but she said something that made me, well, I was scared for her. She said Richard was getting more desperate, that he was going to do something to make sure she didn't get full custody of their son." Mike nodded slowly, his mind working. Sarah had been desperately trying to shield her child from Richard's abuse, but now she was caught in a whirlwind that threatened to pull her under. The woman's fear wasn't unfounded. Richard would stop at nothing, and the trail that Sarah had been trying to follow had just become an even more dangerous game. The officer's mind was spinning with new questions. What was Sarah thinking? Why had she left her child alone? Had she simply made a terrible mistake? Or had she run because she thought Richard was closing in? He couldn't afford to waste time. Every moment counted, especially if Richard was out there somewhere hunting for Sarah and the boy. Mike thanked the woman and left the house, his thoughts racing. He needed answers, and he needed them fast. On his way back to the station, he called his partner, Detective Emily Hart. She was a calm presence in the chaos of Mike's increasingly frantic mind. "Emily," Mike said, his voice tight, "I need to know more about Richard. Everything. Get me his last known whereabouts and any history with Sarah that you can find. This situation is escalating faster than I expected." "Already on it," Emily replied. "I'll pull the records now. I think we need to prepare for the worst." Mike knew she was right. He had seen it before. When a desperate man had nothing to lose, the damage could be catastrophic. Richard wasn't just angry. He was dangerous. The clock was ticking. As he parked at the station, Mike found himself glancing back at the boy now resting in the back of an ambulance. His tiny face was bruised by the weight of the world, even at such a young age. How much could a child endure? Mike didn't know yet how he would solve this case, but he had one goal: to get that boy back with his mother. The thought of Richard winning, of him taking the boy and turning his life into something twisted and unrecognizable, gnawed at Mike's gut. Just then, Emily's call came through. "I've got something." "Go ahead," Mike said, his voice tense. "Richard is hiding out somewhere near the outskirts of the city. Word is he's been making threats to Sarah. I think he's got a plan to get her back, and it's not a good one." Mike's chest tightened. The walls were closing in, and he had no idea how much time they had left before things got out of control. "Let's move." Mike slammed the car into drive, his eyes focused ahead, and in that moment the haunting words of the boy echoed in his mind. "Mommy won't come back." Mike's hands gripped the steering wheel as he sped through the streets of Phoenix, his mind racing. Emily's report was unsettling, but it was all he had. He had no idea what kind of trap Richard had set, but he knew that every second was becoming more critical. As he pulled into the parking lot of the police station, Emily was already waiting. She waved him over, her face etched with determination. "He's been moving around the outskirts, changing locations. He knows we're coming for him," she said, "but we've narrowed it down. There's a place near the old factory district. It's remote, and I've got a source who says that's where he's been spotted last." Mike didn't need any more explanation. The factory district was isolated enough to make it the perfect hiding spot. If Richard was there, it was only a matter of time before things turned violent. The tension in the air felt like static, the kind of energy that makes every second drag on forever. "Let's go. We'll need backup," Mike said, his voice tight. The two officers made their way to the nearby tactical unit, gathering their equipment. They didn't speak much on the drive, each lost in their own thoughts. Mike couldn't stop replaying the boy's face in his mind. The terror, the helplessness. It was like a weight pressing down on his chest, one he couldn't shake off. Emily glanced over at him. "You okay?" Mike nodded, though the anxiety gnawed at him. He wasn't sure if he was trying to convince her or himself. "We just need to get this over with." As they approached the factory district, the city skyline slowly faded behind them, replaced by rusted buildings and empty streets. The air here smelled of dust and abandonment, a stark contrast to the life and movement of the city. The factories had long been shut down, leaving behind a skeleton of concrete and steel. This was the kind of place someone could disappear, especially if they knew how to blend in. The factory district was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made Mike's senses sharpen. His footsteps felt loud as he walked across the cracked pavement, the sound of his boots echoing off the empty buildings. Emily was a few paces behind, her eyes scanning every corner. "Any idea where exactly?" Mike asked, his hand resting on the grip of his holstered gun. Emily glanced at her phone. "We're close. One of Richard's friends said he's holed up in an old warehouse near the back. It's not much of a place to hide, but that's where he's been seen." They turned a corner, and the dilapidated warehouse came into view. It was a hulking structure of broken windows and peeling paint, its metal doors barely hanging on their hinges. The place looked abandoned, but Mike knew better than to assume anything. Richard had lived in the shadows for years. If he was hiding here, it was likely well prepared. The two officers crouched behind a stack of crates, their eyes locked on the darkened entrance. Mike could feel his heart thumping in his chest, a constant reminder that this was no ordinary arrest. This was a man on the edge, a man willing to do anything to get what he wanted. They waited, listening for any movement, any sign that Richard was nearby. Every minute felt like an eternity. "Mike," Emily whispered, her eyes narrowing. "I think I see movement inside." Mike nodded, his mind racing. "We move in together, watch your back." As they approached the entrance, Mike could hear the faint sound of footsteps from within. Richard was close. He could feel it. The tension was suffocating, but Mike pushed forward. Emily moved in alongside him, both officers drawing their weapons as they crept closer to the door. And then, without warning, the door swung open. Richard stood there, a smirk on his face, his eyes cold and calculating. He wasn't surprised to see them. He had been waiting. "Well, well, well," Richard said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Didn't think I'd be found so soon." Mike's heart pounded as he stepped forward, his gun trained on Richard. "You're coming with us, Richard, it's over." But Richard just laughed, stepping back into the shadows of the warehouse. "You think it's over? You think you can just take me down like this?" Before Mike could react, Richard lunged for something hidden behind him, a gun. Mike's instincts kicked in. He fired. The shot rang out, echoing through the empty warehouse. Richard stumbled back, blood staining his shirt as he dropped to the ground, clutching his side. Mike didn't hesitate. He moved forward, keeping his gun trained on Richard as Emily secured the area. "Don't move," Mike growled, his voice steady despite the rush of adrenaline. "You're done," Richard groaned, trying to push himself up, but he was clearly in pain, unable to escape. His smirk had faded, replaced by a grimace of frustration. "You think you've won, don't you? You think I'm the monster, you don't know anything." Mike stepped closer, his heart pounding in his ears. "I know enough," Richard laughed bitterly, wincing with each movement. "You think you're saving that kid? You think that's the end of it?" Mike's gaze hardened. "What are you talking about?" Richard's laugh was almost manic. "You have no idea. You think you can protect him from me? You can't. You can't protect him from what's coming." A cold shiver ran down Mike's spine. He didn't know what Richard meant, but his words stuck with him, like a threat he couldn't shake. "Enough talk. We're done here," Mike said firmly, his voice betraying none of the fear he felt. He signaled to Emily to cuff Richard. As they led Richard out of the warehouse and toward the squad car, Mike's mind kept turning. Richard was dangerous, and it was clear that he wasn't finished yet. But one thing was for sure. He wasn't going to stop Mike from doing everything in his power to protect that boy. The fight was far from over. The adrenaline was starting to wear off, but the weight of the situation remained heavy. Mike sat in his squad car, hands still gripping the steering wheel, though the rest of his body felt drained. His mind kept replaying Richard's words, those cryptic warnings that felt like a shadow lingering just out of reach. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this whole situation, something darker than just a custody battle gone wrong. Emily climbed into the car, her expression grim as she glanced at Mike. Richard's in custody, but I've got a bad feeling about this. His behavior, it's like he's already planning his next move. Mike nodded, staring out at the streetlights that blurred past. The city felt quieter now, almost suffocating in its stillness. We need to know what he meant by what he said about the kid. We can't just lock him up and think it's over. Agreed, Emily said, her voice steady. But the question is, how do we get inside his head? He's not talking. Mike's thoughts turned to Sarah. They had yet to find her, and that was the piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. How could Richard be so sure of himself if Sarah was still out there somewhere? Was she in more danger than they had imagined? His phone rang, snapping him out of his thoughts. He grabbed it quickly, the name on the screen instantly pulling his attention. Dawson, he answered, his voice sharp. Mike, it's Karen from the department. You need to hear this, Karen said, her tone urgent. We've just received something, an anonymous tip about Sarah. She's hiding out, Mike, near a motel off Highway 10. We don't have much time. Mike's heart jumped in his chest. His mind raced as he processed the information. How reliable is the tip? We've run it through and it's solid. The location's clear. If Richard's been keeping tabs on her, this could be the last place she's hiding. You need to move fast. Got it, Mike said, already starting the engine. Thanks, Karen. He hung up, and without a second thought he was speeding toward Highway 10. The information was like a lifeline, but it also deepened the pit in his stomach. Was Sarah safe? Had Richard found her already? Emily was quiet as she slid into the passenger seat, the urgency of the situation clear between them. Mike could feel her eyes on him as he drove, the tension in the air thickening by the second. They arrived at the motel just after midnight. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting an eerie glow on the rundown building. Mike parked the car a few blocks away and surveyed the area. This wasn't a place where people went for rest or comfort. It was a last resort, a place to hide when there were no other options left. Stay close, Mike murmured to Emily as they exited the car. His hand hovered near his gun as he approached the motel office, the silence of the night almost deafening. Inside, the office was dimly lit, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up as they entered, a tired, disinterested expression on his face. We're looking for a woman named Sarah Thompson, Mike said, his voice firm but calm. She's staying here? The clerk glanced up at them, his eyes narrowing slightly before he responded in a bored tone. Room 13, but I don't know if she's still there. I haven't seen anyone come in or out for a while. Mike exchanged a glance with Emily. Thanks. They moved quickly toward the back of the building, their steps barely making a sound on the cracked pavement. As they reached the door to room 13, Mike felt his pulse quicken. There was no telling what they would find behind that door, but every instinct screamed that time was running out. Mike knocked sharply, his voice steady but urgent. Sarah, it's the police. We need to talk to you. There was a long silence before the door creaked open just a few inches. A pair of eyes peeked out, eyes that were wide with fear and suspicion. Who are you? Sarah's voice was shaky, barely audible. We're here to help, Emily said quickly, her tone soft but authoritative. We're looking for you, Sarah. Richard is in custody. You're safe. For a moment there was only silence, the kind that made the air feel thick. Then slowly the door opened wider, revealing Sarah standing there, her face pale and drawn. Her clothes were disheveled, and there was a frantic energy about her, like she was still processing what was happening around her. Where's my son? She asked, her voice breaking. Where's Noah? Mike's stomach tightened at the mention of the boy's name. Noah's safe. He's with the paramedics. We found him earlier today. Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she collapsed into a chair by the door, her hands trembling. I thought I lost him. Emily stepped forward, kneeling beside Sarah. You're not alone anymore. We've got this. Richard can't hurt you anymore. But Sarah's face twisted in confusion, and her voice wavered with the same fear that had been haunting her since this all began. You don't understand. It's not over. Richard, he's not just after me. He wants Noah. He won't stop until he gets him. He won't stop until he makes me watch. Mike felt a cold chill run down his spine. There it was again, Richard's twisted obsession with control. It wasn't just about vengeance. It was about taking everything from Sarah, everything she loved. Before Mike could respond, Sarah spoke again, her voice almost a whisper. "He's going to come for him. He's going to hurt him. I know it." Her words hung in the air like a death sentence. Mike's heart pounded in his chest, the weight of her fear settling deep within him. "Not if I can help it," Mike said, his voice low and determined. Emily stood up, her gaze steady. "We need to get her out of here, Mike. We're running out of time." Mike nodded, his mind already moving to the next step. The pieces were falling into place. Richard wasn't done yet, and if Sarah's fear was any indication, the worst was still to come. "Let's go," Mike said, reaching for Sarah's hand to help her up. "We'll get you both out of here, but we need to move now." The tension in the air thickened as they prepared to leave the room, knowing that the clock was ticking. Richard wasn't just hiding in the shadows anymore. He was hunting, and they were the prey, and Mike wasn't about to let him win. The tension in the air was almost suffocating as Sarah clutched Mike's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Every creak of the building, every distant car passing on the road outside, seemed amplified in the quiet of the motel. The darkness of the night pressed down on them, and Mike knew they couldn't afford to stay here any longer. He could almost feel Richard's presence, like a storm waiting to break. Emily led the way out of the room, glancing back to make sure Sarah was following closely. Mike kept his eyes on the entrance, his senses alert, trying to hear any movement. There was no sign of anyone else, but that only made him more anxious. Richard could be out there, lurking, waiting for them to slip up. "Stay close," Mike instructed Sarah, his voice firm. She nodded, her face pale and drawn, a woman teetering on the edge of exhaustion. The motel parking lot was nearly empty, save for a few rusted cars parked haphazardly along the side. Mike led Sarah to the squad car, glancing around nervously. They couldn't just drive out of here like it was any other night. This wasn't a routine case. This was personal for Richard. This was about control, and Mike knew that Richard wasn't going to let Sarah slip away that easily. As they reached the car, Mike quickly opened the door for Sarah, his hand lingering on the handle just long enough to make sure everything felt right. Emily slid into the passenger seat, eyes scanning the street, while Mike took the wheel. They had to get Sarah to safety, away from this place, away from Richard. "Where are we going?" Sarah's voice trembled, breaking the silence. "To a safe house," Mike said, his tone as reassuring as he could make it. "You're going to be safe, Sarah. We've got you." But as Mike started the engine, something in the back of his mind nagged at him. Richard had to know. He had to know they were coming for Sarah. The man was a predator, and he wasn't going to let her escape without a fight. They hadn't even made it out of the parking lot when Mike's phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen, his blood running cold as he saw the name. "Karen," he muttered under his breath. "Mike," Karen's voice crackled through the line, and he could hear the panic in her tone. "I think Richard's been tracking Sarah's movements. He's gone. He's not at the warehouse anymore." Mike's pulse quickened. "What do you mean he's gone?" "I mean he's disappeared. We've checked every nearby road. We can't find him, and we've received reports of someone matching his description at a gas station near the edge of town. He might be after Sarah." Mike's heart raced as the reality of the situation sank in. Richard wasn't just hiding. He was on the move, and he knew where to find Sarah. "Get units to block the exits. We'll be there in 5, Mike said quickly, slamming his foot on the accelerator. The night had just become much more dangerous. Emily was already on alert, eyes scanning every corner as they sped down the dark highway. "This isn't good, Mike. Richard knows exactly what he's doing." "I know," Mike muttered through gritted teeth, his knuckles white on the wheel. "But I'm not going to let him get her, not this time." Sarah's breath quickened beside him, her eyes wide with terror. "Please, please, I can't go back. I won't survive it." Mike's gaze flicked to her, his voice softer now. "You're not going back, Sarah. We won't let him hurt you again." As they approached the gas station Karen had mentioned, Mike's eyes scanned the area, looking for any sign of movement. The place was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. A few cars were parked at the pumps, but there was no sign of Richard. Mike slowed the car as they neared the station, his heart pounding. "Stay in the car," he said quietly to Sarah, his eyes narrowing as he prepared for whatever came next. He didn't want to risk Sarah being caught in the middle of anything. He and Emily got out of the car, moving with purpose as they approached the gas station. Mike's instincts told him Richard was close. He could feel it. The air felt charged, as if something was about to snap. "Anything?" Mike asked. "Mike," his voice low. Emily shook her head, but then she motioned to a figure by the far corner of the station, a man leaning against a pump, his face partially obscured by a hat. Mike's stomach twisted. He knew it was Richard. No one else had that look of desperation mixed with calculation. "Stay back," Mike whispered to Emily, his voice full of urgency. I'll take him alone. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Be careful. Mike moved slowly, keeping a steady pace as he approached Richard. Every step seemed to echo in his ears, the silence of the night amplifying every movement. Richard's head snapped up as he saw Mike coming. His smirk was cold, predatory, and it made Mike's blood run cold. Well, 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 Richard drawled, his voice mocking. You're not as smart as you think, Mike. I knew you'd come for her. Mike's pulse raced, but he kept his voice steady. It's over, Richard. You're done. Richard's eyes flicked to the street behind Mike, and for a split second, Mike's instincts screamed at him. But before he could react, Richard lunged, drawing a knife from his jacket. The movement was fast, almost too fast for Mike to track. He barely had time to raise his hand to defend himself as Richard swung the blade at him. Mike dodged just in time, the cold metal missing his face by inches. The air around them crackled with tension as Mike reached for his gun, but Richard was already on him again, lunging for his throat. It was a blur, a struggle of raw force. As Mike fought to keep Richard's knife from reaching his flesh, he pushed back, desperate to keep control, knowing that if Richard succeeded, it would be too late for Sarah. Richard's grin didn't fade. It grew. You think you can protect her? You're nothing compared to me. I've already won. The words cut through the air like a knife themselves, but Mike wasn't listening to them anymore. All he could think about was Sarah's safety. With a final surge of adrenaline, Mike knocked the knife from Richard's hand and forced him to the ground, using his weight to pin him there. Not this time, Mike growled, his voice full of finality. He reached for his cuffs, locking Richard's arms behind his back. He wasn't going anywhere. Get the squad car, Mike said, his voice low but full of anger. This ends now. As Emily approached with the car, Mike felt his heart finally slow, the intensity of the moment fading into exhaustion. But even as Richard was hauled away, Mike couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. He'd won this battle, but the war wasn't over yet. The squad car rolled silently through the streets, the only sound the soft hum of the engine. Mike sat in the driver's seat, his hands still gripping the wheel, but his mind was a storm of thoughts, each one more tangled than the last. Richard was in custody, for now at least, but the weight of what had just happened, the knife, the words Richard had thrown at him, the fear in Sarah's eyes, pressed heavily on his chest. Beside him, Emily sat in the passenger seat, eyes scanning the road, but Mike could feel her unease too. They had both felt the rush of the confrontation, the dangerous edge of the last few moments, and now they were left to process it all. We've got him, Mike said finally, breaking the silence. His voice didn't sound as sure as it should have. But I don't know if it's enough. Emily turned to him, her brow furrowed. What do you mean? Richard's still got control over this. He's been pulling the strings this whole time. It's like he knows every step we're going to take before we do. I don't disagree, Emily replied, her voice soft but firm. But we have him. He's in custody, Mike. That's a victory. It's one step closer to ending this. Mike's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, where Richard was still in the back seat, handcuffed, his eyes burning with quiet fury. Richard had been silent ever since the struggle at the gas station, his face twisted in anger, but also something else, something Mike couldn't place. It was as though Richard had already made peace with being caught, like he was biding his time, waiting for the moment to strike again. I just keep thinking about Sarah, Mike said, the words coming out of him before he could stop them. What happens when she gets her son back? What happens when she has to face all this again? Emily didn't immediately respond. Her gaze focused out the window. The city lights flickered as they passed, casting shadows across the streets. She'll need time, Mike, time to heal, to rebuild. But she's strong. She's been through a hell of a lot, and she's survived. She has to be given that chance. Mike nodded but couldn't shake the image of Sarah's tear-streaked face, her voice trembling as she spoke about her son. Her fear wasn't just for herself, it was for Noah, the little boy caught in the middle of all this. That boy deserved a future free from fear, but Mike wasn't sure how to make that happen. They reached the station in silence. Mike parked the car and, without a word, got out. The building loomed in front of him, an imposing structure that suddenly felt like a symbol of all the failures in the system, the failures that had allowed Richard to manipulate and abuse for so long. He moved quickly, heading straight for the holding cells where Richard would be processed. Emily followed close behind, her boots clicking on the tile floor. As they approached the cell, Mike couldn't help but glance at Richard. The man was sitting on a bench, head down, shoulders slumped. The rage that had filled his eyes earlier was gone, replaced by an eerie calmness that Mike couldn't trust. It was the calm of someone who was planning their next move. Get him processed, Mike said to the officer at the desk, his voice tight. I want him in isolation until further notice. The officer nodded, moving to secure Richard. Mike stood still for a moment, watching the man closely, his gut telling him that something was wrong. Richard wasn't just angry. He was calculating, waiting for the right moment to strike. And Mike was afraid that moment was coming sooner rather than later. Once Richard was led away, Mike and Emily walked down the hallway to the interrogation room. They had a long night ahead of them, but the truth still felt out of reach. Sarah's situation was still fragile. They hadn't been able to give her the relief she needed. They hadn't even brought her back to her son yet. All Mike could think about was that boy, Noah, waiting in the care of social services, scared and alone. No child should have to go through this. When they entered the interrogation room, Mike sat down at the table, his head in his hands for a moment, gathering his thoughts. Emily leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching him carefully. The room felt small and suffocating. "We need to find out what's really going on here," Mike muttered to himself. "Richard can't just be this focused on Sarah and Noah. There's something more, something he's not saying." Emily's eyes narrowed. "You think he's hiding something? You think he's been planning this all along?" Mike nodded slowly, rubbing his temples. "He's been pulling every string, manipulating every situation to his advantage. I think he's got more control over this than we realize. He's been playing the long game." Suddenly, Mike stood up, his voice sharp. "We need to find Sarah. We need to make sure she's safe. If Richard is already making his next move, we can't let her be alone for another minute." Emily nodded. "I'll make the call to the social services team. We'll get her somewhere secure." "Mike, but we need to act fast. Richard's still a threat, and he knows how to slip away." Mike didn't say anything in response. He knew Emily was right. They were still in the middle of this storm, and until they had Richard fully under control, Sarah and Noah weren't safe. As Emily stepped out to make the calls, Mike's mind continued to race. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play than he understood. Richard wasn't just a father desperate for his son back. He was someone who saw himself as untouchable, someone who would destroy everything in his path to regain control. Mike knew that if they didn't get ahead of him now, they would lose, and losing wasn't an option. Just as Mike sat back down at the table, the door opened again. A uniformed officer stepped inside, a look of urgency on his face. "Mike," the officer said, "there's been a development." Mike's heart skipped a beat. "What now?" "There's been a report," the officer said, his voice shaking slightly. "Richard's been in contact with someone outside. We think he has an escape plan." The room went deathly still. Mike's worst fears were becoming reality. It wasn't over yet, and this time, Richard had a head start. Mike stood quickly, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "We need to move now." Every second counted. Mike's stomach churned as he processed the officer's words. Richard had an escape plan. The thought hit Mike like a punch to the gut. They had caught him, they had him in custody, and still, Richard had found a way to turn the situation in his favor. It was all part of the man's sick game, and Mike had been too slow to catch it in time. The officer stood frozen in the doorway, waiting for instructions. Mike's brain raced, 1,000 scenarios flashing through his mind. He needed to act fast, but he had to be strategic. Richard wasn't just dangerous because he had a history of violence. He was clever. He knew the system, knew how to manipulate it, and now it looked like he had an escape route lined up. Mike stood up quickly, forcing his thoughts into order. Where's Richard now? Was he in contact with anyone specific? The officer shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flicking to the floor before meeting Mike's gaze. "We've traced the call. Richard was in contact with someone outside, someone who was coordinating an escape. We think he's been working with them from the inside." Emily's voice came from behind Mike, her presence a calming counterpoint to his rising anxiety. "We need to secure the building. I'll call for reinforcements. Get every exit covered. But Mike, we need to move fast." Mike nodded, his jaw tight. The seconds were slipping away, and he could almost feel Richard laughing at the chaos he was stirring from his cell. "Let's go. We can't afford to waste any time." The team scrambled into action. Emily began making calls, coordinating with the surrounding units, ensuring every exit from the station was blocked. Meanwhile, Mike moved swiftly through the hallways toward the interrogation room where Richard was being held. As he reached the holding area, Mike's heart dropped when he saw the empty cell. The steel bars were wide open. Richard was gone. The officer who had been assigned to watch Richard was pacing nervously, his face pale. "I swear I locked the door, Mike. He was just sitting there quiet. And then he was gone. We searched the entire holding area, and nothing. No sign of him anywhere." Mike clenched his fists, frustration building inside him. He should have seen this coming. Richard was too dangerous to be underestimated. "Where did he go?" Mike demanded. "We think he used the air vents," the officer stammered. "He must have known the layout. He must have been planning this for a while." Mike cursed under his breath. Richard had used the ventilation system to slip out unnoticed, probably leaving no trace behind. It was a move that would have taken patience and precise planning. "We need to find him. Now," Mike said, his voice low and determined. "Emily, get me a full list of his known contacts, anyone who could help him. And I want everyone watching the streets. He's not far." Emily nodded, already typing rapidly into her phone. "I'll send units to search the area. No stone left unturned." But as Mike turned to leave, something stopped him. A thought, a sudden realization. The escape, the phone call, it all pointed to one thing. Richard hadn't been trying to flee on his own. He had someone on the outside, someone who had helped him orchestrate this, and that person wasn't finished yet. Sarah was still at the safe house, unaware of the danger that was unfolding. Mike felt a wave of guilt wash over him as he thought about her, about how much she had been through, how she had fought to keep her son safe. But now the nightmare wasn't over. Richard was out, and he wasn't going to stop until he had what he wanted. "Mike!" Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. He looked up to find her standing in the doorway of the command center. "We found something. We've traced Richard's last phone call to a warehouse near the docks." Mike's eyes narrowed. The docks. It was the perfect place for an exchange, a place to hide in plain sight. Richard's reach was longer than they had anticipated, and now it seemed like he was preparing for his final move. "Get a team together," Mike ordered, his voice sharp. "We're going to the docks." As Mike and Emily prepared to leave, Karen approached them with a worried expression on her face. "Mike, I'm pulling the file on Richard's contacts, but there's something you need to know. We've been getting anonymous tips about someone working with him, a woman named Lisa Hamilton. She has a history of involvement with Richard, and we think she's been helping him escape." Mike's gut clenched. Lisa Hamilton. The name rang a bell, and suddenly he remembered the faint connection from earlier in the investigation. If Lisa was involved, it meant Richard had been using her to orchestrate his movements from the outside. He was never alone in this. "Where is she?" Mike demanded. "She's been in and out of the area," Karen replied. "She's one of Richard's few trusted allies, but right now we can't pinpoint her location." Mike's mind raced. Lisa had always been in the background, out of sight, a piece of the puzzle that he had never fully accounted for. But now it was clear. She was the key. If Richard was working with her, she was the final piece of the puzzle. They couldn't afford to let her slip through their fingers. "Find her, we're going to the docks. But if Lisa's out there, I want her found first. She's got to be the one helping Richard." With that, they set off. The air around them felt thick with the pressure of what was to come. Mike's thoughts were consumed by Sarah and Noah, by the life that was still hanging in the balance. He didn't care about Richard anymore, not in the way he had before. Richard was just a piece of this web, a web that was more dangerous and complicated than he had ever anticipated. They couldn't afford to let Lisa or Richard get away, not again. As they pulled out of the station and onto the highway toward the docks, Mike's thoughts turned dark. Richard had always been in control, always one step ahead, but tonight, Mike would take that control back, no matter what it took. The docks were eerily quiet when they arrived, the air thick with the smell of salt water and the distant hum of industrial machinery. The shadows of the large shipping containers loomed over them, casting long, twisted shapes across the ground. Mike's heart beat faster as he scanned the area, his instincts on high alert. They were close, he could feel it. But he couldn't afford to underestimate Richard again. This time he wouldn't make the same mistake. "Stay sharp," Mike ordered, his voice low and steady. He could be anywhere. With every step, the weight of the situation pressed heavier on his chest. The storm was about to hit. The docks were a maze of steel containers, rusting in the dim light of the moon, each one towering above them like a silent sentinel. The only sounds were the distant hum of a truck engine and the rhythmic crash of waves against the pier. Mike could feel the tension tightening in his chest, each footstep echoing in the emptiness. They were close now, closer than he liked, but there was no turning back. Richard was somewhere out here, and if they didn't find him first, it was only a matter of time before he went after Sarah and Noah. Emily's voice cut through the silence. "This place gives me the creeps, Mike. It's like we're walking into a trap." Mike nodded grimly, his hand hovering over his holstered gun. "Richard's a man who works in shadows. He knows this place. He's probably counting on us getting lost in the maze." They paused behind a stack of containers, listening carefully. The air was thick with the salty sting of the ocean, but it felt suffocating, like the weight of everything pressing down on them. "This is it," Emily whispered, her eyes scanning the shadows. "If Richard's here, he's got backup. Stay sharp." Mike's stomach churned. He had to think of Sarah, of Noah, their safety hanging by a thread. Every decision, every step had led to this moment. But the uncertainty of what lay ahead made it hard to breathe. They moved forward, stealthy, determined. Mike's eyes darted around, checking every corner, every dark spot between the containers. Then ahead, he saw a flicker of movement. A shadow darted behind a large container. "That's him," Mike said quietly, nodding toward the movement. They crept closer, silent as ghosts, every step bringing them nearer to their target. As they approached, the sound of muffled voices reached their ears, low, urgent, but unmistakably familiar. Mike motioned for Emily to stay back as he advanced. The shadows parted just enough to reveal Richard, standing beside a woman. His face twisted in a mix of frustration and amusement as he spoke to her. "Get it done." Richard's voice was cold, commanding. "I'm done waiting. Once I have them, nothing will stand in my way." Mike felt the blood drain from his face. The woman beside Richard was none other than Lisa Hamilton, the last piece of the puzzle. She was the one who had helped him slip through the cracks, the one who had kept him in the shadows all this time. "Lisa," Richard's voice grew quieter, but still sharp. "You know what to do. This ends tonight." Lisa nodded, her eyes flicking nervously around the docks, as if waiting for something or someone to emerge from the shadows. Mike's heart pounded. He could hear every word clearly now, and it hit him like a slap in the face. Richard wasn't just planning an escape. He was making his final move. He wasn't running anymore. He was going to get Sarah and Noah, and this was the place where it would all go down. The docks, this lonely, isolated stretch of land, was where Richard planned to confront them, maybe end it all. Mike could feel the weight of the moment. If they didn't act now, they would lose everything. "Move," Mike whispered to Emily. "We've got to stop this right now." They advanced quickly but carefully. Richard and Lisa were still talking, unaware of their approach. As they neared, Mike's mind raced. He couldn't afford a mistake. He had to make the first move. Suddenly, a sound, footsteps crunching on gravel, made them freeze. Mike's eyes darted toward the sound, and his heart skipped. From the shadows, two more figures emerged, armed. They were here for the same reason, to finish what Richard had started. "Ambush," Emily muttered under her breath. Mike's pulse spiked as he realized how outnumbered they were, but there was no turning back now. They had to act fast. He motioned to Emily, signaling her to cover him. He wasn't going down without a fight. Mike stepped out from his cover, gun drawn, his voice steady but urgent. "Richard, Lisa, it's over." Richard's eyes snapped to him, his face hardening. His smile, once confident, twisted into something dangerous. "You think you can stop me? You're too late." Lisa took a step back, her hand hovering near her own weapon. Richard's men moved into position, circling around them. "Drop the gun," one of the armed men barked, pointing his weapon at Mike. Mike's grip tightened. He had no intention of dropping his gun, not when Noah's life was on the line, but they were outgunned. The odds were against them. "Not a chance," Mike shot back, his voice low and steady. "This ends now. You'll never touch Sarah or her son." Richard laughed, the sound harsh and mocking. "You're a fool, Dawson. You think you've won. You think you can stop me. You have no idea what I'm capable of." Before Mike could respond, Richard's man lunged toward him. But Mike was quicker. He sidestepped the man's reach, pulling his gun up to fire a warning shot. The bullet ricocheted off the metal container, and the man hesitated for a split second. That was all Mike needed. He moved fast, stepping closer, using the moment of distraction to disarm the attacker. A sharp twist, a pull, and the gun was in Mike's hand. But Richard's laughter echoed in the air again, this time more manic, more desperate. "You think you've won?" Richard spat. "This is just the beginning. I've already won." Mike didn't have time to process his words. He was already moving. As he rushed forward, Lisa took a shot at him, her aim off but close enough to rattle him. He dove for cover behind a container, narrowly avoiding the bullet. "Mike!" Emily's voice was frantic from behind him. "Get out of there! They've got the upper hand!" Mike didn't respond. He couldn't. His focus was entirely on Richard, who was now backing toward the water, dragging Lisa along with him. There was no way Richard was going to get away again. Not like this. "Mike, stop him!" Emily shouted again. "The escape route is blocked." Mike's heart skipped a beat as he realized what she meant. Richard wasn't trying to escape. He was cornered, and he was going to fight. He was going to take someone with him. A sudden burst of action, too fast for Mike to fully react. Richard raised his gun, pointing it straight at Sarah and Noah, who were just arriving at the docks with a police escort. "No!" Mike shouted, taking off in a sprint. Everything blurred as Mike raced forward, the sound of his own heartbeat deafening in his ears. The seconds stretched on like hours, as Richard turned toward the woman and child he had terrorized for so long. The final showdown was happening now, and this time, Mike wasn't going to let Richard win. The world seemed to slow to a crawl as Mike sprinted toward Richard. Every step felt like it took a lifetime, his heart pounding furiously in his chest. but his mind sharp with focus. Richard had the gun pointed directly at Sarah and Noah, his finger twitching as if he were contemplating pulling the trigger. The air felt thick with tension, the salty ocean breeze carrying a sense of impending doom. "Richard!" Mike shouted, his voice cutting through the night air. "Put the gun down, this isn't the way." Richard's eyes narrowed as he turned to face Mike, a sneer forming on his lips. "You think you can save them, Dawson? You're too late. You don't control this." Mike's mind raced as he closed the distance, his every instinct screaming at him to get there faster, to stop Richard before it was too late. He could see the fear in Sarah's eyes, the helplessness in Noah's face. They were trapped. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Mike's gaze flicked to the gun in Richard's hand. It was shaking, but not from fear. Richard wasn't afraid. No, Richard was furious, and that made him dangerous. Mike had to stop him before he made good on the threat he had been holding over them for so long. Emily's voice broke through the haze of focus in Mike's mind, sharp and clear. "Mike, don't let him get in your head. You've got this." He nodded silently, his grip tightening around his own weapon. Richard might have the upper hand in this moment, but Mike wasn't going to let him control the outcome. Not this time. "Richard, listen to me," Mike shouted again, hoping to distract him, hoping for a crack in his resolve. "This isn't the answer. You think you'll win by hurting them? You're only going to destroy yourself in the process." Richard let out a harsh laugh, the sound echoing off the steel containers around them. "Destroy myself? I've been destroying my own life for years, and now I'm taking everything I deserve. I'm done playing nice." His finger tightened on the trigger, and Mike saw the first spark of motion. It was happening. Richard was about to fire. "No!" Mike yelled, pushing forward with everything he had. In that split second, everything came crashing together. Mike dove to the ground, using the element of surprise to tackle Richard's legs from under him. The gun went off, the sound deafening, but the bullet missed its target, hitting the concrete just inches from Sarah and Noah. Mike grunted as he twisted Richard's arm, trying to wrestle the weapon away. Richard kicked out, his boots slamming into Mike's side, knocking the wind out of him, but Mike didn't let go. The man was strong, desperate, but Mike's resolve was ironclad. He wasn't going to let Richard have one more victory. With a final heave, Mike managed to knock the gun from Richard's hand. It clattered against the pavement, sliding out of reach. Richard's rage boiled over, and he lunged at Mike with his fists, but Mike was already moving, positioning himself to pin Richard down. "You're done," Mike growled, forcing Richard's hands behind his back and securing the cuffs around his wrists. "No more running, no more threats." Richard spat on the ground, his face red with fury. "You think this is over? You think I'm the only one who can destroy your precious little world?" Mike's eyes met Richard's, unflinching. "You're done, Richard. You'll never hurt them again." As Mike stood, pulling Richard to his feet and dragging him toward the waiting police units, he could feel the tension in the air begin to lift. The storm had passed. Richard was in custody, and it was over. Sarah and Noah were standing just a few feet away, Noah's small hand gripping his mother's. Sarah's face was pale, her body still trembling from the fear she'd just endured, but when her eyes met Mike's, there was a flicker of something else. Relief, gratitude, and something deeper. Mike knew what it was. It was the kind of unspoken understanding that passed between people who had seen the worst, who had fought against the odds and come out on the other side. "You're safe now," Mike said softly, walking toward them. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she stepped forward, her voice cracking. I thought I'd lost him forever." Mike gave a small, reassuring smile. "You didn't. He's safe now." Noah looked up at Mike, his small face still etched with fear but softening as he looked at the officer who had made all the difference. "You stopped him?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mike knelt down to the boy's level, meeting his gaze. "Yeah, kid, I stopped him. You're safe now." Noah's face broke into a small, hesitant smile, and for a moment, the weight of everything that had happened seemed to lift. The nightmare was over. They were safe. They could finally begin to rebuild. The ride back to the station was quiet. The tension that had filled the air just hours before was gone, replaced by a quiet sense of relief. But Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was still left undone. He kept replaying the night's events in his head, wondering if there was anything he could have done differently. Had he missed something? Was there a way to have stopped it all before it escalated? Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "You did good, Mike." Mike glanced over at her, her face tired but satisfied. "We did good," he corrected, offering her a small smile. As they pulled into the station, the weight of the night seemed to settle on his shoulders. Richard would be processed, and Sarah and Noah would be safe. But Mike knew it wasn't the end. It couldn't be. The damage had been done, the scars would remain, and the work of rebuilding would be long and painful. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Mike allowed himself a moment of peace. They had stopped Richard. They had saved Sarah and Noah, and that was all that mattered. Later that night, as Mike sat at his desk filling out reports, he couldn't help but think of Sarah and Noah. They still had a long road ahead of them, but Mike had a feeling they'd make it through. There was strength in them, a quiet resilience that Richard hadn't been able to break. And for the first time in a long while, Mike allowed himself to believe in the possibility of hope. The storm had passed, and maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward. He leaned back in his chair, staring out at the darkened streets of Phoenix. The city was quiet now, at peace. For tonight at least it was safe, and for Sarah and Noah. And tomorrow could be the beginning of something new, something better. Mike couldn't ask for more than that. The morning sun broke through the clouds as Phoenix began to wake up, but for Mike, the weight of the night lingered. The city that had seemed so vast and uncaring now felt a little smaller, a little more personal. The streets hummed with life, but for those who had lived through the storm of the past few days, Sarah, Noah, and even Mike, there was no going back to the way things were. Mike was at his desk, the pile of paperwork in front of him no longer seeming as important as it once had. His eyes kept drifting to the photograph of Sarah and Noah on his desk, the relief in their eyes so palpable, so real. It reminded him that despite everything, there was always a chance for redemption, for healing. Emily's voice broke through his thoughts. "You're staring at that photo like it's going to talk to you, Mike." Mike smiled faintly, glancing up. "Just thinking." She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, the exhaustion still visible in her posture. "I don't blame you. I'd be thinking too if I had just gone through what we did last night." Mike nodded but didn't speak. His mind was still racing. Even though Richard was behind bars, it didn't feel like closure. He kept thinking about the things Richard had said, about the way he had tried to manipulate everyone in his path, using fear and control like weapons. The chilling reminder that someone like Richard could hide in plain sight, slipping through cracks in the system, it haunted him. "What's next?" Mike asked finally, his voice low. Emily raised an eyebrow. "I'd say breakfast, but I'm guessing that's not what you mean." Mike chuckled quietly. "I mean, what happens to them now, Sarah and Noah? They're safe, but what? You think this is just going to magically fix everything?" Emily finished his thought. "It's going to take time, Mike. Healing doesn't happen overnight, and neither does rebuilding trust. Sarah and Noah are going to have a long road ahead of them." Mike looked out the window again, watching the busy streets of Phoenix. It was a peaceful scene, families out walking, the sun shining down, a city moving forward. But that peace, he knew, would always be shadowed by the violence Sarah and Noah had endured. "I just wish I could give them more," Mike muttered. "More than just taking Richard off the streets, more than just safety." Emily was silent for a moment, and Mike could tell she understood what he meant. "You gave them something, Mike. You gave them a chance. That's more than most people get." Mike didn't say anything to that. He knew she was right, but it still felt like he hadn't done enough. His phone buzzed on his desk, breaking the silence. He picked it up quickly, checking the number. It was from Sarah. "Mike," her voice sounded hesitant, and he could hear the subtle tremor underneath it. "I just wanted to thank you for everything, for saving us." Mike felt a lump form in his throat. "Sarah," he said, his voice soft, "you don't need to thank me. I'm just glad you're safe." "I don't know what I would have done without you," she continued. There was a pause, and Mike could tell she was struggling to find the words. "I'm starting over, Mike. I'm not sure where to begin, but I have Noah, and that's what matters." "That's all that matters," Mike said gently, his eyes closing briefly as he let the weight of her words settle in. "You'll figure it out. Take it one step at a time. I don't know if I'll ever get over the fear of what happened, but I promise you I'll keep going. For Noah, take care of each other. That's all you need to focus on right now." "Thank you, Mike," Sarah said quietly, the gratitude clear in her voice. "Thank you for everything." Mike didn't respond right away. He didn't know what else to say. His job was done. He had done what he was trained to do, but the emotional toll of what he'd witnessed still lingered. He just wished there was more he could offer her, more he could do for both of them. The line went silent for a moment, and then Sarah spoke again, her voice a little firmer. "I'm moving on, Mike. I'm taking the steps to rebuild, with Noah by my side. I hope you understand." Mike swallowed the knot in his throat. "I do. I'm glad to hear it." They both said their goodbyes, and Mike hung up the phone. He sat back in his chair, his hands folded in his lap, and let the moment settle. For the first time in a long while, he felt something he hadn't felt in a while. Hope, not for himself, but for Sarah, for Noah, for what they could have, despite the odds stacked against them. Emily had been watching him silently, and now she spoke again. "How's she doing?" Mike sighed, the weight of his exhale releasing the tension in his chest. "She's taking the first step. They're safe, that's all that matters. Emily smiled softly. Emily, you did good, Mike. He nodded, but his mind was already moving forward. He had done his part, but the journey ahead was theirs. Sarah and Noah's journey was just beginning. Yeah, Mike said quietly, but the real work starts now. Later that day, Mike stood at the window in his office, watching the city move on as it always did. He felt at peace in a way. The streets were busy, the noise of everyday life filling the air, but it wasn't a chaotic sound. It was a sound of hope, of people moving forward. He turned away from the window and grabbed his jacket. There was more work to do, there always was. But today, for the first time in a long time, he knew that some battles were worth fighting, and some victories were worth the struggle. Mike walked out of the station a little lighter than before, with the knowledge that he had made a difference. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a chance, a real chance for a new beginning. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough. The city of Phoenix carried on beneath the hot sun, its streets alive with the sounds of everyday life. And Mike Dawson, the officer who had fought for the safety of one family, walked into the future with a quiet sense of satisfaction. For today, it was enough.
Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.